imagine a text written, thousands of years ago
Yeah.
that actually contains a geographic coordinate system, a biological countdown, and even a hidden character.
Right.
And all of these elements are just functioning perfectly together to predict an event centuries in the future. Today, we are taking the ancient story of Abraham and Isaac, a narrative that, most of us know simply as a standalone test of a man's faith, and we're looking at it through the lens of our provided sources.
Yeah, it's really something else.
Because according to these sources, this isn't just some old diary entry about ancient nomads. The authors argue it's this highly engineered anticipatory blueprint. So welcome to the deep dive. We are thrilled to have you, the learner, joining us today as we unpack the structural prophecy hidden inside the Akedah, which is the Jewish term for the binding of Isaac in Genesis chapter 22.
And the premise our sources lay out is just fascinating when you approach these ancient Near Eastern texts not as like flat linear histories, but as these complex, multi-layered literary architectures.
Right, like they're built with a specific purpose.
Exactly. The argument is that the story of Abraham and Isaac was recorded or, perhaps deliberately curated over time to serve as a perfect parallel to the New Testament narrative of God and Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of just a straightforward recount of events going from point A to point B, the source material suggests the text functions much like a musical fugue.
A fugue. Okay, I like that.
Yeah, so think about it. A melody is introduced in the first movement, and then it gets hidden, maybe inverted a bit, and finally it's played in full orchestration in the final movement.
That fugue analogy it's honestly a much better way to look at this than just assuming ancient scribes were jotting down a chronological diary.
Definitely.
So to see how this melody starts, our sources point us to the very first line of God's command to Abraham in Genesis 22. And the text reads, "Take now thy son, thine only son, Isaac, whom thou lovest."
Right.
But wait, let's unpack this for a second, because that phrase, only son, presents a pretty immediate paradox.
Mm-hmm.
We know from earlier chapters that Abraham already had an older son, right?
Yeah.
Ishmael.
He did, yeah.
So framing Isaac as the only son isn't exactly a biological fact. It's clearly a deliberate narrative choice by the author.
It is, and the sources highlight that specific phrasing as our first major clue. The text is basically pushing the reader to look past the literal family tree and pay attention to a deeper textual pattern being established here.
Okay.
Because by isolating Isaac as the only son, the text aligns his role perfectly with the New Testament concept of the only begotten son.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But the deeper layer here relies on a concept in scriptural study that's known as the law of first mention.
Right. Let's explain that mechanic for the learner for a second. So the law of first mention is this principle in ancient literary construction, suggesting that the very first time a word or a crucial concept appears in the text, it acts as an anchor.
Exactly.
It sets this massive thematic precedent, essentially defining how that concept will be used for the rest of the overarching narrative. And according to our research, the word being anchored in this specific verse is love.
Which is wild when you think about it.
Right.
Just considering the sheer volume of events that occur before Genesis 22, the absence of that word is striking. You have the creation of the universe.
The Garden of Eden.
Yeah, the flood, the Tower of Babel, these massive covenants being made, and yet the word love is intentionally withheld by the authors until this exact moment.
That is so deliberate.
It really is.
Yeah.
The very first time love is mentioned in the biblical record, it is structurally locked to the concept of a father being asked to offer up his only son.
Which creates a direct thematic mirror to arguably the most famous verse in the New Testament, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son.
Yes.
Our sources argue that this isn't just a coincidence, but rather the text setting up the entire New Testament framework in a single, perfectly crafted opening sentence. So if the first note of this fugue is love, the tempo is set by a very specific timeline, right? Once the command is given, how does the actual journey mirror the future?
Well, the morning after the command is given, we see Abraham rise early. He saddles his donkey, takes 2 of his young men and his son Isaac. They cleave the wood for the offering and begin their journey.
Okay.
And the text explicitly notes that it is on the 3rd day that Abraham lifts his eyes and sees the designated place afar off.
The 3rd day.
Right. And to understand the significance of this, our sources point to commentary found much later in Hebrews 11:19.
Yeah. Looking at that commentary, the argument is really about Abraham's psychological and faithful state. As far as Abraham was concerned, the decision to obey was made immediately.
Exactly.
Therefore, Isaac was effectively dead the moment that commandment came from God, and the journey took 3 days.
3 days, yeah.
So for those 3 days, the son was essentially gone in the mind of the father, only to be returned to him alive on the third day when the ram is substituted at the last moment.
And the sources map this 3-day clock as a direct, almost like a biological countdown, anticipating the 3-day resurrection prophecy found in the New Testament. I mean, in ancient storytelling, a 3-day journey often signifies a period of transition or trial, but here, the argument is that it's a highly specific prophetic marker.
And the parallels, they extend beyond just the timeline, don't they? It goes right into the physical mechanics of the climb itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Because once they reach the mountain, the staging of the scene is just meticulously framed. It's almost like a director setting up a cinematic shot. Abraham tells his 2 young men to stay at the bottom of the hill with the donkey.
He strips away all the supporting characters.
Exactly. The narrative just clears the stage. Only the father and the son ascend the hill, and the Hebrew text specifically notes they walked in agreement. So there's this united submission to the event.
Furthermore, and this is a key detail, Abraham takes the wood for the burnt offering and lays it directly upon Isaac.
Oh, wow.
The son is required to physically carry the wood for his own sacrifice up the hill.
But that is just...
Right. The authors of our sources view this as the ultimate visual foreshadowing of the New Testament narrative, where the son carries his own wooden cross to the site of his execution.
Isaac carrying the wood is just the ultimate foreshadowing. And the dialogue during this ascent adds a whole other layer to this framework.
It really does.
Because Isaac, knowing the ritual mechanics of a sacrifice, he logically asks his father, "Behold the fire and the wood, where's the lamb for a burnt offering?"
And Abraham's response is incredibly specific in the Hebrew syntax. He says, God will provide himself a lamb.
Provide himself?
Yeah, the phrasing there is critical to the source's argument. In the immediate literal context of the story, sure, God provides a physical ram caught in a thicket to take Isaac's place.
Right, a literal substitution.
But read it through the prophetic lens our sources are applying, God will provide himself, carries a dual meaning.
Wow.
It suggests that in the overarching blueprint, God will eventually provide himself as the ultimate sacrifice.
Okay, so we have a timeline, and we have the characters acting at a very specific script. But, a timeline needs a precise destination to anchor it in reality.
It does.
Which brings us to why topography is so crucial in Near Eastern storytelling. God tells Abraham to go to the land of Moriah. And looking at the topographical maps and the geological data our sources provided, Moriah isn't just an isolated hill.
No, not at all.
It's a prominent ridge system in the region.
Yeah, and geography in these ancient texts is rarely accidental. Let me lay out the map for the learner here.
Please do.
The Moriah Ridge system is cradled by 3 very specific valleys. You have the Tyropeon Valley to the west, separating it from Mount Zion, the Kidron Valley to the east, separating it from the Mount of Olives, and the Hinnom Valley to the south.
Okay, so it's really clearly defined.
Exactly. And the ridge itself slopes upward, starting at an elevation of roughly 600 meters above sea level at its southern end and rising as you go north.
So walking up that ridge historically, the very first settlement at the bottom is a place called Salem, right? And earlier in Genesis, we are introduced to Salem as the domain of Melchizedek, who was a king and a priest. So since there was already a thriving settlement there, our sources point out that Abraham bypassed Salem.
Right. He didn't stop there.
He didn't offer his son in an inhabited town at the bottom of the hill. They kept climbing, and as you continue up the ridge, the elevation reaches a saddleback area at about 741 meters.
And that saddleback at 741 meters is highly significant in the broader biblical timeline.
Oh, yeah.
It is identified as the threshing floor of Arona.
Okay.
Generations after Abraham, King David actually purchases that exact piece of land, and it ultimately becomes the site of the Jewish temple.
Wow.
So the epicenter of later Jewish sacrificial law sits squarely on the middle of this same ascending ridge.
But the text implies Abraham and Isaac went to the peak, right?
Right.
And the Temple Mount isn't the highest point of the Moriah Ridge.
No, it isn't.
If you keep ascending north from the temple site, the ridge culminates at its highest peak, which sits at an elevation of exactly 777 meters. And according to the topographical historical arguments in our sources, that specific peak at 777 meters is Golgotha.
The argument being made is just staggering when you consider the implications of ancient textual engineering.
It's mind-blowing.
The claim is that the exact geographic coordinate where Abraham offered his son Isaac at the top of the Moriah Ridge is the precise location where, centuries later, the New Testament records the crucifixion of Jesus.
Talk about GPS-level precision in an ancient text. It transforms the narrative from just a thematic echo into a literal geographical lock.
Absolutely.
And to support this, our sources highlight the name Abraham gives the location after the event. He names the place Jehovah-Jireh, which translates to, "In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen."
It shall be seen.
He uses a future tense. The argument here is that the author of Genesis is deliberately planting a flag on this specific peak, signaling to future readers that the ultimate fulfillment of this narrative structure will literally be seen on this very spot.
The precision of the geography, the timeline, the linguistics, it all weaves together perfectly.
It really does.
But just as the geographic narrative reaches its absolute climax, the literary narrative introduces an anomaly that fundamentally shifts how the rest of the text must be read.
Right. And this is the part of the analysis that requires you, the learner, to really pay attention to the negative space in the text.
Yes, the omissions.
Think about the last time you read a book or watched a movie where a main character just vanished mid-scene without any explanation. You'd assume it was a glaring plot hole, right? Or just bad editing. Let's look at Genesis 22, verse 19.
Okay.
The sacrifice is called off, the ram is offered, and they head back down the mountain. The text reads, "So Abraham returned unto his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham dwelt at Beersheba."
And remember, we established earlier that the two young men were left waiting at the bottom of the mountain with the donkey.
Right.
So the father comes down from the peak, reunites with the servants, and the text specifically lists who travels home. Abraham, the two young men, and the donkey.
Isaac is completely absent from the text.
He's just gone.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Did the writer just make a typo? I mean, we know Isaac logically, physically, had to walk down that mountain. So why delete him from the story? As a reader, you have to ask why the author would purposefully omit him right there.
According to the theological interpretation provided by our sources, this is absolutely not a typo or careless storytelling.
No.
The authors argue it is deliberate textual editing attributed, in their view, to the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And it's designed to maintain the structural integrity of the overarching prophecy.
Because in the New Testament narrative, after the son is offered on that specific hill, he departs.
Exactly.
He is no longer physically seen in the day-to-day narrative of the world in the same mundane way.
Right. So to faithfully model that future reality, the literary structure of Genesis requires Isaac to be personally and intentionally edited out of the biblical record from the moment of the mountain offering.
He is made invisible in the text.
Yes.
Okay, so if the text deliberately hides the main subject of the melody, we have to look for where the melody returns. If Isaac vanishes from the script at the end of chapter 22, when does he finally reappear, and how does his reappearance fit into the overarching blueprint?
Well, for that, our sources direct us to fast forward 2 chapters to Genesis 24, and this requires a bit of an understanding of the cultural mechanics of ancient Jewish wedding traditions.
Okay, lay that on us.
Genesis 24 introduces a new typological sequence. Abraham, who has represented the father figure in this blueprint throughout, commissions his chief servant to travel to a far country to gather a bride for Isaac, the unseen son.
Why?
This aligns perfectly with ancient Near Eastern betrothal customs, where a representative of the groom's family negotiates the mohar, or bride price, and establishes the covenant before the bride ever meets the groom.
And in chapter 24, the servant isn't actually named, is he? He's simply referred to by his title.
Right, he's unnamed there.
However, if you cross-reference back to Genesis 15, it reveals that Abraham's chief servant is named Eliezer.
Yes.
And in Hebrew, the name Eliezer translates to comforter.
And the sources lean heavily into this linguistic connection. In the New Testament, the Holy Spirit is explicitly and repeatedly referred to as the Comforter.
Right.
So Eliezer becomes a living typology for the Holy Spirit. His mission in the narrative is to be sent out by the Father to a distant land to gather a bride for the Son.
The sequence of events that follows just maps perfectly onto the theological concept of modern faith, as argued by our sources. The Comforter, Eliezer, arrives at a well and meets the chosen bride, Rebecca. And the first thing he does is bestow precious gifts upon her, which mirrors the New Testament concept of the Holy Spirit giving gifts to believers.
Exactly. And following the receipt of these gifts, and after hearing the servant's testimony about the son, Rebecca makes a profound decision.
Yeah.
She agrees to enter into a marriage covenant with a groom she has never physically seen.
Wow.
She commits her life to him entirely based on the word and the provisions of the Comforter, and then she embarks on a long, arduous journey across the desert to meet him.
This ancient cultural practice is just utilized by the text as a prophetic template.
It is.
It perfectly mirrors the modern faith paradigm. Believers, representing the bride, receive gifts and guidance from the Comforter, the Holy Spirit. They travel through the journey of life to ultimately meet a living groom they haven't yet laid physical eyes on.
And the culmination of this blueprint is where the structural engineering truly shines.
Yeah.
After being completely absent from the narrative since the climax on Mount Moriah in chapter 22, the exact moment Isaac is written back into the biblical text is when the bride completes her journey.
The grand reappearance. He steps out into a field at eventide, and the unseen son is finally reunited with his bride. And the location of this reunion is incredibly specific.
Yes, it is.
It happens at a place called the Well of Lahai-Roi.
And linguistic analysis of that location name reveals yet another layer of the fugue. The Well of Lahai-Roi translates from Hebrew to mean the well of the living one who sees me.
The well of the living one who sees me. The text goes to great lengths to emphasize that while the son was invisible to the narrative, he was never actually dead.
Right.
By intentionally hiding Isaac, the authors of Genesis created a model not just of the sacrificial offering of the son, but of his eventual reunion with his bride. He remains hidden from the reader's view until he meets her at the well of the living one.
When you synthesize all the elements our sources have presented, the level of interconnected literary and historical engineering is just remarkable. You aren't just reading a sequence of events, you are reading a coded framework designed to project a specific theological message across millennia.
Let's quickly summarize the core timeline we've tracked through this analysis. It began with the law of first mention, anchoring the word love to a father offering his only son, perfectly echoing John 3.1 sin. Then we track the biological countdown of the 3-day journey, mirroring the concept of a resurrection where the son was as good as dead before being returned.
And we followed the topographical map, bypassing Salem, crossing the threshing floor of Arona, and climbing all the way up the Moriah Ridge to the 777-meter peak of Golgotha.
A geographic coordinate labeled with the prophecy, "It shall be seen."
Exactly.
Then we witness the deliberate, intentional disappearance of the son from the text. We explore the cultural mechanics of the betrothal, where the Comforter gathers an unseen bride, equips her with gifts, and guides her across the wilderness.
Right.
And finally, the son dramatically returns to the text to meet his bride, the well of the living one.
This deep dive illustrates exactly why studying the mechanics of ancient texts is so vital. It really challenges the assumption that historical records are merely flat narratives.
Yeah, they're anything but flat.
The authors of our sources have demonstrated how ancient scribes used topography, cultural customs, linguistics, and even deliberate omissions to weave these multi-layered arguments.
And to you, the learner, this fundamentally transforms how you can approach reading any historical or foundational text. It trains you to look for the structural architecture beneath the surface plot. It's not just a collection of old stories.
It also leaves us with a highly provocative question regarding the analysis of history.
Ooh, what's that?
Well, if the deliberate silence of a text like Isaac being intentionally left out of the trip back to Beersheba holds such immense narrative weight, what other silences or missing details in the historical records are actually loud, intentional messages waiting for you to decode them?
Wow. When the silence speaks that loudly, we need to learn how to listen to what isn't being said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning the architecture beneath the surface, and remember that sometimes the most profound melodies in a text are the ones that are carefully hidden, waiting for you to uncover them.
Thanks for joining us on this hour on the Archive Hour. Join us on our next hour as we bring you more adventures from the Bible.